Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and get started. I want to welcome everyone to the fourth webinar that the Bell Policy Center is hosting in partnership with the Colorado Gives Foundation. Excited to have you all here, excited to introduce our panel in just a moment. Especially appreciate you being with us on such a nice day. You could all be outside on a walk during your lunch hour, and instead you are here with us, here to learn about housing policy, how it impacts Jefferson County. And today we are going to take our focus from the local level. Over the past three webinars, we've talked a lot about the housing situation in Jefferson County, some of the specific challenges facing the community, and then some of the tactics and strategies that are being used to build more housing, more affordable housing, and to do so in a way that engages the community. Today, we're actually going to spend a little bit more time focused on what's going on at the state level. Before we do that, go ahead and let us know who you are. The chat is open. Please let us know, who you are, who you're with, and that gives us a sense of who we're talking with. It's good to know. Sometimes we've got just folks out in the community who are curious to learn more. Other times we've got policy analysts who know a great deal and are looking for maybe that second level of understanding in terms of what's going on. And I don't think I introduced myself. My name is Scott Wasserman. I'm the president of the Bell Policy Center, and I'll be moderating our conversation today. And let me introduce our panel. So we've got three amazing panelists with us today. From the state legislature, we have Representative Chris DeGree Kennedy. He is the Speaker pro tem in the State House. He is from House District 30, which is firmly planted in Jefferson County, and he is a frequent ally and partner and collaborator that works with the Bell Policy Center. So welcome, Representative DeGree Kennedy. We have Kinsey Hastet with us as well. She is the Senior Program Director for State and Local Policy at the Enterprise Community Partners here in Colorado. Does a lot of great coalition work, and we really appreciate having her expertise with us today. And then finally, we have one of the Bell's own policy analysts. He couldn't make it to the last panel we had because he was doing his civic duty and had jury duty, but he's joining us today. Graham Hallett is a policy analyst who focuses on housing issues in the state with the Bell Policy Center. So I want to welcome everybody to the panel discussion today. And I guess what I'd like to do, and what we're going to do today, is we're going to talk about what's happening at the state capitol. And I think, as many of us have read or watched, that over the past few years, the state legislature has spent an enormous amount of time talking about housing in the state. I think it's pretty clear to everyone at the state level that every region of the state is facing various housing issues. And of course, there are all kinds of different dimensions to the challenges that we are facing. But I think there is a recognition that there's a great deal that the state should be doing. And so I'm going to ask Representative DeGree Kennedy to join us. And we're going to welcome him. And Representative DeGree Kennedy, welcome to the panel. Appreciate having you here. Why don't we just kick off? I learned yesterday that only 68% of Coloradans were unaware that the legislature held a special session to deal with property taxes. And I mention that because I think that while because we're mired in this, we think about this every day. We know the state legislature has a role to play in the housing conversation and is meeting and talking about this, that huge swaths of the Colorado public are unaware of the work that the state legislature is doing. And I think it raises this question of what, housing is a local issue. So what role at all does the state play, and what are the levers that the state can affect that ultimately make a difference for people at the local level in Jefferson County when it comes to housing?
Sure. So first of all, thank you so much for having me, and I'll circle my way back to this, what we did in the special session in a little bit, but I think housing policy has been predominantly a local issue for a long time. I think that by the time I joined the legislature, we were long past the point in the 1970s when we first established land use rules, which my understanding before that time was that, local, a landowner basically was able to do whatever the heck they wanted. And it was in the 1970s that we started putting in place these zoning rules that gave city and county governments the opportunity to build these comprehensive plans to decide, okay, we want this to be a residential neighborhood, and we want this to be a commercial district, and we want the industrial stuff as far away from the residential as possible. And so on the land use front, there had not been a lot of action at the state level since the 70s when that was first done. And so it had been local governments making zoning decisions, local housing authorities that tried to cobble together the best financing they could. There is the Colorado Housing and Finance Authority that pairs with the Division of Housing in the state government that provides limited funding and loans and those sorts of things to help do more. And CHAPA certainly has been a robust part of this. And then there have been certain state tax credit policies, like the low-income housing tax credit, that is given some seed money to pair with the other funding streams to help make affordable housing projects more attractive, so that we're having the appropriate balance in the housing market between affordable projects and market rate projects. And so it's largely been around those kinds of things that we have taken action historically. I would say in the last several years, there have been some shifts. I think part of this is that the state economy is in a somewhat different place, where we've had a tremendous amount of demand to live in the Denver metro region, all of Colorado really, but especially Denver metro. And that imbalance of supply and demand has put a ton of pressure on the housing market, which has driven the increase in property values that have driven the increase in property taxes. It has made the rental market very difficult for renters and very lucrative for property owners. And so there has been a renewed focus on renters' rights legislation over the last decade, where we've done a lot about abusive rental application fees and other things that are maybe egregious practices to make sure that it's a more fair process for both renters and landowners. And of course, since the repeal of the Gallagher Amendment a few years ago, property taxes have been back on the state's docket for a potential policy approach. And we can talk about the pros and cons of that, but it certainly was a prominent part of the conversation last year in the legislature. There was a big ballot measure that voters rejected, Proposition HH, that was on the ballot last year. And then, of course, this special session in November, where we tried to look at what we could do to try to help people with their high rents and high property taxes at this time. But I think what you're hearing are a lot of different bits and pieces of what we tried to do on something that is fundamentally still a local government issue, where the state is playing a supportive role at best.
Right. And so, as we'll talk today, funding is obviously a big piece of this puzzle. And then, a change in the conversation and a recognition that, yes, zoning is a local power, but we live in regions and we're all connected and we all kind of share this problem. I think it's great to have you on here today. And I know that there are others of your colleagues who are driving or leading the conversation. But I'm curious if you can just give us your perspective as a Jefferson County legislator. I mean, how do you look at these issues through a local lens? And are there specific ways? I mean, I think it feels so abstract to people. Like, we read in the newspaper, big headline, like governors championing ADUs. We just read about a new bill that would connect some zoning requirements to funding. Like, how is this manifesting? What do you think of in terms of specific spots in Jefferson County where you see the state discussion really impacting the community that people see as they drive and work and live in Jefferson County?
Yeah, I think I'm going to start in the Lakewood area, because that's been the bulk of my district, and I think the bulk of my experience. Think about the West Colfax corridor. Think about everything between Sheridan and Wadsworth. I mean, there's been a lot of fanfare lately about the rejuvenation of Casa Bonita. And there have certainly been some affordable housing projects in that corridor along the light rail, the bus lines on West Colfax. But really, there are a lot of properties in that corridor that are very much in need of restoration, that are the perfect places for us to be doing more affordable housing, and yet there has been tremendous local resistance to doing it. And it's because of this not in my backyard phenomenon, where there are an awful lot of people that acknowledge the need for more affordable housing, but they don't want it to be too close to them. And you end up having these conversations about, are there enough parking spots on the streets? What is going to happen if there are more cars that are coming and going from these places? Does this block my view of the foothills? These are important things, but I think that it is hard sometimes when it gets too hyper local of a conversation. We do miss the bigger picture. And if everyone is saying yes but not here, then where do you go? And so I think that you look at West Colfax between Sheridan and Wadsworth, it is such a prime example of where we should be doing higher density housing. That area is technically a food desert, and if we were able to bring in some more high density housing, there's the potential of attracting another grocery store back into that area and making it a more walkable and friendly community. Another one that I'll just point out, I think a lot of folks that live in Lakewood, Wheat Ridge, Edgewater, kind of central Jeffco, are familiar with the driver's license office at 18th and Pierce, which is just a couple blocks from Casa Bonita. The Department of Revenue, which runs that facility, is considering over the next 5 years or so, relocating that staff to another facility. And if that were to happen, that would be just another place that would be one of the best places we can imagine for more affordable housing that, does not put the maximum number of cars on the street. So those are these kinds of examples. And I want to contrast that to sprawl. I think that people that live in Jeffco love the foothills. We love Dinosaur Ridge. We love that we get to drive down C470 and that there are these long stretches of it where you're kind of looking up at the mountains at one side of your car. And a lot of that land is privately owned, and there have been conversations in recent years about developing that space. I think that this is where the local piece really comes in, is you do want that balance. You do want your local governments to be able to determine, okay, yes, maybe this is not the best place for growth because this is a community amenity that we all want to protect. But if you're going to do that, you have to make the infill possible in parts of the city where it's ripe for development. And I know that Arvada, Westminster, Littleton have all been having very similar conversations to the ones that I've been hearing about in Lakewood.
Great, thank you. So somehow, I don't know how we did this. We're like running short on time for your section. So I guess we'll take Q&A from participants now, because I know you might have to go. And maybe we'll just defer this next question, but I'll just go ahead and ask it. I mean, what are the big buckets of what's being discussed this year? And then Graham and Kinsey are going to get more in the weeds. Just how do you categorize it in your head as you think about the legislation this year?
Yeah, I think I would think about it in a few different categories. I think there's everything related to land use and the extent to which the state is going to put new requirements on local governments for what they do, as opposed to the total discretion they have right now. It was a big fight last year. The big marquee bill lost last year. And so there are kind of more piecemeal efforts that are being proposed this year, including a transit-oriented development bill, including bills about accessory dwelling units. And so those, I think, I put largely into the land use category. There's broader funding conversations happening, whether there are expansions of the low-income housing tax credit. The governor's budget proposal does include an expansion of that tax credit this next year. So that again goes into the financing of the development of new housing projects. I would say that the renters' rights conversation is always an important one, and maybe we could frame that as direct supports for renters and owners. And so some of it is, clearing barriers and issues that have been challenges for renters. Some of it is about direct financial assistance. What can we do in terms of tax credits for low-income renters, low-income homeowners, to help them afford the cost of living in Colorado? So those are probably the best three ways to categorize it.
Okay, great. All right, we're going to hear a little bit more about some of those policies from Kinsey and Graham, but since we know you might have to go, always a possibility, this would be a great time. If anybody has any questions for Representative Reed Kennedy, that would be great. Let's see, we have one question from Mindy Moore. Does the newly introduced House Bill 24-1313 do anything to promote or create more public mass transit in Metro Denver, areas that desperately need it, thinking of West Arvada, or just apply to transit centers that already exist, like along the G line?
So I need to dig in a little bit deeper to that specific piece of legislation, but I don't believe that it funds transit itself. I think that it is fundamentally about trying to make sure that where you have existing transit centers, that we're upzoning and trying to bring in higher density housing around light rail stops and bus stops. There are parallel conversations about transit expansion, though. So just because it's not all contained in a single bill does not mean it's not part of the whole. We often have numerous bills that are designed to kind of work together. And so transit funding, both for expansion of transit infrastructure, but also just kind of maintaining what we've got right now, are really important parts of this conversation. The governor mentioned it in his State of the State speech, and a lot of people are looking at creative ideas for what we can do to build out more transit infrastructure. In Jeffco, I'm not sure what that exactly means. I think for us, we've already got the West Line and the Gold Line running through Jeffco, and we have basically had our man, I'm going way back in time to when we first funded the Fast Tracks project, but I think Jeffco basically got its part of the light rail expansion of what we agreed. Boulder, on the other hand, has not. They were promised a light rail line through Boulder that they did not get. And so I think that Jeffco probably won't be seeing more light rail infrastructure in the near future. I do think there is a lot of talk about more bus routes or more frequent bus stops.
Great, thank you. One more question from Don Cameron. Any comment on Jeffco itself avoiding sprawl? They are doing an update to their master plans, but it looks like the same old all growth is good model. Thoughts on that?
You know, I haven't looked at their new master plan development, so I can't comment on the specifics. I think, you know, I'll just say that these are tough conversations. And I do think that the comprehensive planning process that our local governments go through is the right way to do this. I am less familiar with Jefferson County's process than I am to the city of Lake Woods, but my understanding is that there are similarities. These local governments do very robust processes to invite community feedback in. And when you do that way, when you slow it down and bring in those voices to talk about where do we want to grow and where do we not, I think it does help build the right kind of framework that the commissioners, especially as they're acting as the zoning board, you know, in those quasi-judicial decisions, it gives them the guardrails of where they're to operate. But you know, it doesn't surprise me to hear that feedback, that sometimes these do say all growth is good growth. And I know, Don, from the Golden perspective, the leaders of Golden have been trying for a long time to protect the things that make the communities in Golden so special. And that's an important part of the conversation too. You know, I think that we do need to be thoughtful about where growth happens. And so I'll have to dedicate some time to digging into that master plan discussion for Jeffco.
Great. Thank you. Yeah, and we do have one more question, but we'll kick that to the Q&A, I think, in the next section. So let's hold on to that. Appreciate your time. And if you have to go, no problem. Hope you can stay on. So now we're going to bring on two policy experts who work in the advocacy space. Kinsey Hostet, as I said, is the Senior Program Director for State and Local Policy at Enterprise Community Partners, and Graham Hallett works as a policy analyst here at the Bell Policy Center. So Representative Degree Kennedy kind of gave us the broad strokes, kind of, you know, the larger conversations, the role the state can play. Would love for you to get a little deeper. And I guess what I was hoping you could do is like pick one or two policies that are your favorite. Actually, they don't have to be your favorite, but the thing that you are, you know, you think is most interesting or most intriguing, and to talk a little bit about them. So, you know, Kinsey, maybe we'll go with you first, and talk to us a little bit about, you know, what is the proposed policy in the simplest possible terms you can, and then how does that policy impact Jefferson County? Why should people in Jefferson County care one way or the other? And, you know, talk to us a little bit, I guess, give us some color commentary. Where is it in the process? And what are some of the arguments on either side of the policy so that we understand the challenges that legislators are navigating.
Well, thank you, Scott. And thank you all for being here. I'll echo folks' gratitude for people joining us on such a beautiful day. And nice to see some familiar names in the participation list out there, and meet new people. I'm Kinsey, the State and Local Policy Director with Enterprise. For folks who don't know Enterprise, we are a national organization working across the country and here in Colorado to increase the supply of largely affordable rental homes, and to advance housing stability. And we do that through capital investments, place-based programmatic work, and policy advocacy, which is where I come in. So favorite is a strong word, Scott, I think, for legislation sometimes, but there are two bills that Enterprise Community Partners is really pleased to be working with some of our friends to lead this year. The first one is House Bill 1175, for folks who like numbers and want to track it. This is an effort being very brilliantly led, I think, by Representative Basenecker from up in Fort Collins. And this bill would give local governments the right of first refusal to acquire existing affordable housing properties before they go up for sale or before they might be lost to market rate interest. The bill also establishes a right of first offer process on other multifamily homes, which is a much more streamlined and straightforward process than the right of first refusal. It largely requires kind of a notification from the seller of the property to the local government and a short window for the local government to put in an offer. And overall, the bill is really intended to preserve the existing affordable housing that we have across Colorado and within communities. You know, I think the representative did a wonderful job of illuminating and talking about kind of how we need more affordable housing. We certainly need development. And at the same time, the more that we let existing affordability restrictions on buildings and rental homes that are already there and already serving communities expire, and those affordability restrictions go away, and the rental units become more expensive, or the entire property is purchased and rented out at higher rent, you know, we're setting ourselves back. It's really hard to dig out of a hole when you keep digging the hole deeper at the same time. And so Enterprise is co-leading this legislation with the Colorado Coalition for the Homeless, and we're proud to have lots of supporters, including the Colorado Municipal League, representing local governments, and Colorado or county commissioners acting together, representing counties. And what we hear is that sometimes local governments try to acquire these existing buildings. They try to put in an offer and put together the financing to keep the homes that exist in their communities affordable and to keep the people who live there in their homes. And a lot of times local governments or public housing authorities who under this bill could act in a local government's stead simply can't act fast enough to compete with market rate interests and out-of-state investors or other highly moneyed investors, frankly, who might be able to put down cash. And so this bill is really intended to give local governments a bit more of an even playing field, again, specifically on that right of first refusal side when it comes to existing affordable housing. And when it comes to Jefferson County in particular, you know, statewide, we have estimates that there are anywhere between 70 and 77,000 rental homes that are currently affordability restricted, meaning they have to be affordable to folks living on lower and fixed incomes across the state. And an estimate from CHAFA that in the next 10 years, we're going to lose the affordability restrictions on 14,500 of those units. In Jefferson County specifically, according to data my colleague was able to find in the Jefferson County 2020 to 24 consolidated plan, you all have an estimated 15 publicly subsidized properties in Jefferson County, at least at the time of the writing. And the plan noted that 185 units within those properties, their affordability covenants or restrictions expired in May of 2023. They may have remained affordable. I don't know what buildings those are. So to be clear, the expiration of an affordability restriction doesn't mean that they're already gone, but that's what opens them up to being acquired and turned into market rate housing. And about half of the rental units in those 15 publicly subsidized properties are serving people who are living at or below 80% of Jefferson County's area median income. And for a more concrete idea, for one person in 2023, that was $69,000. And for 3 people, that was just over $89,000. So we're really seeking to preserve the housing and advance a meaningful housing stability bill at the same time to prevent displacement with this one. We just passed out of our first committee hearing yesterday afternoon on a vote of 8-3. We are headed for seconds on the House floor. It could come up as early as Friday, but no guarantees. And a lot of the opposition to the bill is really coming from the idea from bankers, from investment firms who are arguing that this kind of bill will depress the market and stymie investment. And I think we would offer as a counter that, for instance, the Colorado Housing Finance Authority is oversubscribed on their state housing tax credits 3-1. You know, Representative Degree Kennedy mentions that they're running a bill to expand the tax credit. There is a huge amount of demand out there, and Colorado is an excellent place to build and preserve. So, you know, I hear the argument, and also Enterprise thinks that there is room for both this right of first refusal and right of first offer bill, as well as continued investment. Briefly, the second bill is Senate Bill 64. Enterprise is co-leading this with partners at the Colorado Children's Campaign, and it is being led by Senator Mullica. And this bill has to do with eviction data. So we are pursuing having state judicial and Denver County Court collectively collect and publicly aggregate and publish key data from eviction court filings. So right now, we do have somewhat of a sense of how many residential eviction filings happen in county courts, but there is so much more information that is already contained in a court filing for an eviction that would, if it were collected and published, would not disclose the identity of either the renter or the property owner, but would give us such a better understanding of kind of why evictions are being filed in Colorado, disparities that exist in the court process between landlords and renters and how we might remedy those, trends in how cases are decided, and even an understanding of how much money landlords are claiming are owed when an eviction is filed over unpaid rent. And all of this, we believe, it's certainly worthwhile to make sure that this data is being collected consistently and accurately, as it can really inform future, more targeted and more effective policy and programmatic interventions that are upstream to try to, you know, prevent eviction filings from happening in the first place. And we believe stabilize renters and property owners and landlords, our court systems and our communities as a whole. We really see this as a benefit to everybody, and creating a more stable and effective housing ecosystem overall. And that bill has also passed its first hearing. That was a couple of weeks ago. That bill has a pretty hefty fiscal note. The Judicial Department thinks it will cost them quite a lot of money to implement, so we're working with them on that. But right now that bill is sitting in appropriations, waiting for bigger machinations of the legislature to move forward. And nobody is opposed to that bill. So there you go.
Yes. Even without opposition, because of Colorado's very tight fiscal situation, that sometimes these bills unfortunately don't make it. And I think, resources are an issue. And I think you've done a good job highlighting, in addition to the things that Rep. Degree Kennedy have talked about. I mean, beyond funding and land use, there is the legal environment and sort of where are there opportunities to give local governments a fighting chance in a larger market. And then this other issue, which we think about a lot at the Bell, which is data. And we take for granted that we have all this information at our fingertips, which then informs our policy recommendations and helps us understand the nature of the problem we're facing. And so, very often information is very powerful to help us better target what we're doing. We do have some questions. I think I'm going to delay on those. We'll go to Q&A after Graham talks about some of his faves. So Graham, welcome to the panel. What are you tracking? What are the things that are catching your eye in the legislative process right now?
Yeah, and first off, just want to echo the gratitude for everyone being here today, whether it's a sunny day or not. Appreciate everyone coming around. And to the bill, I'll focus on some of the land use and zoning bills that are coming through this session. For those that were paying attention, last session there was a comprehensive land use and zoning bill that would have had some pretty far-reaching changes to local zoning codes, trying to increase housing density and the supply of affordable housing. This year, legislators are trying to move that forward, but breaking up a few of the key elements of that comprehensive bill and attempting to do so in a more flexible approach to thread this needle between maintaining local control over zoning, but also making sure that we can enjoy more affordable housing options. So two of the bills that came from that are reworkings of last session's comprehensive bill is one on the housing in transit-oriented communities, and then the accessory dwelling units bill that was mentioned previously. The first, housing in transit-oriented communities, HB 1313, it would increase zoning density around transit sites, so bus stops or light rail stations, and it would remove barriers in place that limit housing density to encourage building more housing around these transit sites. In Jeffco, this would apply to Lakewood, Arvada, Edgewater, Westminster, Wheat Ridge, and Golden, but then also other areas could opt in if they chose to, but they wouldn't be required to. And so for these cities, for these areas that they're required to, they would look to develop property close to rail stations or high-frequency buses, as well as future transit lines. So the state, based off of these transit nodes, the state would set housing opportunity goals, and then each city would be able to determine how they meet those goals. So say in Lakewood, the city decide, well, we want to build higher density along each light rail station to meet this goal. They could do that. At the same time, if Lakewood said, well, that doesn't make sense based off of what's already built, what's already in place in our infrastructure, instead they could decide to build even more densely around, say, the Garrison light rail station. So that flexibility of meeting these higher density goals, but allowing for different approaches to meet those goals is an attempt by the state to still push along in local communities, but allow the flexibility to achieve it.
And on that, in my surface reading of the coverage, I mean, there is a carrot and a stick approach here. Last year the narrative was, here's the state forcing this upon local communities. Is there a change in the approach this year in terms of creating incentives? Like, can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So there is a mix of carrots and sticks, mandates and incentives. And one of these is if cities would need to meet these, to determine their plans to meet these housing goals by 2026. If a city didn't meet their goals or didn't have a plan to meet the goals, they might lose infrastructure funding from the highway users tax. But at the same time, they can get financial assistance to meet these goals. And that's through a mix of 35 million in grants and 30 million in tax credits. And then for these areas that aren't mandated to meet these goals but want to opt in, they'd also be able to use these incentives, these grants and tax credits, but wouldn't face the loss of funding through the highway users tax. So to speak a little bit more about these other areas, they decided to opt in and didn't have these transit nodes. They could instead build around downtowns or main streets as sort of neighborhood centers, and gain access to these financial incentives. To continue building along this path, communities would need to share a progress report every 3 years. Now this bill is in its early phases. It was introduced this week. It isn't up in committee yet. but we do have some hopeful polling that about 68% of Coloradans support increased housing density around transit sites. So we'll continue to monitor the bill's path forward. And just a note, for this bill or any others, the Bell Policy Center has a legislative tracker on our website where you can follow the progress of these bills as they continue forward. The other zoning land use bill that I'll talk about is a bipartisan one, also in its early phases, and it's the accessory dwelling unit bill. Now, ADUs are secondary dwellings on the same lot, usually in the lot of a single family residence. So this could be in built-in backyards or on top of garages, and they're typically pretty small, 500 to 800 square feet. And this bill would remove restrictions in certain communities to allow a household to build an ADU on their property if they chose to do so. Some of the merits of ADUs for increasing housing and affordable housing is that they can be built at relatively low costs and greater speeds. They can be used for intergenerational housing, help supplement income for households on fixed incomes, and they're very often affordable rental options. They're also more energy efficient compared to single family homes as they utilize existing water, sewer, electricity lines. And so, yeah, in removing these restrictions on ADUs and where they can be built, it would apply to certain areas in mostly metro areas in Jeffco, although places like Golden and Lakewood already allow ADUs. And this bill would also come with some financial incentives to encourage the construction of more ADUs. Households, say in Westminster, that want to construct an ADU on their own property would now have this choice, and the impact on affordable housing in Jeffco really depends on the uptake by homeowners. So to help facilitate that construction and increase uptake, there would be $10 million for local governments to help in developing and improving ADUs by offering discounts on fees and other methods, and then another $8 million to help assure that ADUs are more targeted for lower and middle income households. Because this would be money for down payment assistance and low cost loans to help finance these ADUs, which currently costs around $300,000 on average to construct. This bill is also in its early phases. It's up in committee next week, but like the transit bill, there's a lot of support for it. About 78% of Coloradans support ADUs. Just to kind of jump to some opportunities, change this bill and possible changes we might see. Another amendment that could be added to the bill is legalizing lot splits. And so that's selling a portion of your yard and allowing it to be separately developed. And this would help homeowners that might be at risk of displacement, who can't afford the construction of an ADU to help supplement income and stay in that property, but want to benefit from changes in the regulations and restrictions on their property. So I'll leave it there. I know, and there's a lot of good questions out there. And
great.
Back to you, Scott.
Yeah, appreciate it. So yeah, let's get to some of these questions. I want to take, first of all, just a question from Lauren McKinney, and I think this related to the right of first refusal legislation. Would this bill have any impact on properties who have some tax credit units that are set to expire in the next few years? Also, would this bill apply to naturally occurring affordable housing as well, or would it have to be affordability restricted?
I do think that's for me. Thanks, Scott. And thank you for the question, Lauren. So to your first question, yes, absolutely. The right of first refusal provision applies exactly to properties that have tax credit supported units. And one of the reasons we feel it's important to get it passed this year is because we are seeing an acceleration in the expiration of those affordability restrictions. Our best estimate from a national database is that in the last 5 years, there were just over 5,000 publicly subsidized affordability restricted units whose restrictions expired. And CHAPA has predicted an acceleration in the expiration of those restrictions up to, again, 14,500 over the next decade. So those are exactly the kind of properties that ROFR is targeted to serve and preserve. To the question on naturally occurring affordable housing, really that's kind of where the right of first offer provision in the bill comes into play. So the right of first offer, again, is a streamlined and pared down version of a right of first refusal, requiring a seller of a residential multifamily property to notify the local government that they're planning on selling it. And then the local government has, the last time I checked, I think 14 days still, the bill is being heavily amended. The local government has a short time frame to put in an offer to buy the building. Those buildings, the universe of properties that will apply to is to properties that are older than 30 years and to properties in urban areas that are between 5 and 100 units. And in rural and rural resort areas, properties, I think the number got bumped up to between 4 and 100 units. And so we're not really thinking that the right of first offer is going to enable a local government to buy a brand new, luxury apartment building. The goal of ours with this right of first offer is really to try to give local governments or public housing authorities a shot at those small to medium sized multifamily properties that are a little bit older and most likely to be renting at rates below market rate. So that kind of currently or naturally occurring affordable housing that you're speaking of. And it really is, preserving affordability both in income restricted and unsubsidized, but still affordable properties is a goal of ours. And we're hoping that right of first offer could help, facilitate the acquisition of some of those smaller buildings.
Great. So I guess I want to get to, and Greg Holm has been very patient. He asked a question that I'd like to get to, and I think you all have kind of touched on this, but let's talk a little bit about what we call the missing middle. He's, will the legislature take up missing middle housing legislation to address the supply restriction caused by the fact that zoning for around 75% of the land in most cities is only permitted for single family homes, which is the most expensive type of housing. This is a major factor. I mean, you all have touched on density. Does that alone get to it? And we often talk about affordability. Is that affordability for whom? So I'm going to make that question more complicated. What are your thoughts on this issue of the missing middle? And does density alone get us there? How do we address this?
I'll volunteer to start here. So I'm going to break the response into two parts. One, missing middle more broadly, we talk about all the time. And I think that the way that some of the tax credits are structured has been to make sure that we are supporting development of projects that have a variety of different income ranges based on area median income, in some cases state median income. So that's bumped up so that we're not just doing the lowest of the low income where we're trying to do affordability projects. We are trying to make sure that we are investing in the development of housing for people that are closer to middle income. All that said, that's the financing stuff I'm talking about is still primarily a multifamily solution more so than single family. We have not gone as far as to suggest that local governments need to revisit all their single family zoning broadly. I mean, when we talk about the transit-oriented development bill or last year's land use bill, there were these radii or like perimeters around transit zones where something that's currently zoned for single family would have to increase to a multifamily zoning. But I don't think we've grappled with that more broadly than around those transit zones. So this is you're absolutely right about the problem, Greg. But if we think we've got resistance now to the state kind of stepping into the land use conversation, if we were looking at it much more broadly, where you could take larger parts of a city and move from single family zoning to multifamily, I think the resistance would be significantly larger.
Great. And I think I'll just take these, continue to take, well, any other, Kinsey or Graham, any other thoughts on the missing middle?
I would love to offer, oh, sorry, Graham. I'll be very brief, just two. So to my knowledge, there is not a bill coming this year specific to the missing middle housing and upzoning, though it was initially a part of Senate Bill 213 last year. I will share, Enterprise is an organization among many of our partners who had some concerns about it. I certainly all for increasing density and providing more and more affordable options for folks. However, there are significant displacement risks, I think, that are very complicated and challenging to sufficiently address policy-wise when we think about upzoning. The Jefferson Park neighborhood of Denver, I think, is a really good example where in previous years, there were a lot of single-family homes that for a long time had been owned and occupied by Latino families and folks who had been in that community for generations that were, bought and then turned into duplexes or triplexes that wound up costing multiple millions of dollars, perhaps. It's happening right across the street from my own house. And so I think to Scott's point of being mindful of affordable to whom, that's a real question that a lot of folks are grappling with in the upzoning conversation of kind of how to do it, but provide meaningful guardrails and investments in ensuring affordability for people of all income levels so that we're not generating a whole lot more housing that's only affordable to people living on much higher incomes, which is then going to in turn drive up the cost of housing in those neighborhoods and communities. And I will flag, it just dropped, I think yesterday, but Senator Bridges, along with Representatives Lindstedt and Lindsay, have introduced a bill to create a middle income housing tax credit here in Colorado. It's House Bill 1316. I don't know quite how Enterprise feels about it yet, but we will certainly engage in the conversation. But all to your point that legislators, Representative Kennedy and others, as you said, are talking about this all the time and seeking meaningful solutions for folks all along the continuum.
Yeah, we were just looking at that bill ourselves. And I guess that's a good segue. I'm just going to look for good segues here. Kathy Smith asks, so how do tax credits help low-income folks? Many don't pay or owe taxes. You talk a little bit about like, who are these tax credits going to? And actually that was kind of an issue as we were looking at 1316, which is like, should the tax credit go to the owner? Should the tax credit go to the resident? And how do we target these tax credits and make them real for people? Because we often make tax credits kind of hard to get and to actually benefit from. Anyone can take that.
I'm guessing all three of us could take that. But
we've been talking about tax credits a lot, so
yeah, we do have a few tax credit conversations. So a lot of what we've been talking about today are tax credits for the builders of these projects. And so that's a little bit of a different story than the question you asked, Kathy. This would be, part of a larger package of financing, I don't know the correct terminology because I don't do housing finance, but it would be kind of part of the overall funding stream for developing a project. When we do the direct supports for people, whether that be a renter tax credit or some sort of program to assist them with paying their property taxes, you have the option of making an income tax credit refundable so that there is an amount that let's say you owed $500 in taxes to the IRS or to I should use the state equivalent, to the State Department of Revenue. But we had a $1,000 refundable tax credit. The first 500 of that would basically cancel out what you owe the state. And then the other 500 would be a check that you get to deposit. Now it may be taxable federally, but that's how that works for lower income people. Others can perhaps augment my answer there.
Any other thoughts from the panelists, or even just I'm drifting now, but in just even the efficacy of tax credits? And I think there's a big conversation in the legislature, not just on housing, but how effective are tax credits in incentivizing, certain outcomes. And I think oftentimes there's some concern that tax credits can almost have an inflationary role in pricing. So if any of you want to dive into that, I'd invite you to.
Yeah, I can touch on that, just some brief. This is something that we've at the Bell have been working on over the last couple of years, and it is tricky to be able to target these credits to low income folks in a way that one, there's uptake on, that people are able to know about the credit and claim the credit in a way that meaningfully impacts their rent payments or housing payments across the year. And at the same time, we have to worry about these larger issues of not inflating the rental market. Depending on how the credit is targeted, we have to make sure that the savings are actually passed through directly to the renter. And as was touched on earlier, we live in a state with real fiscal restrictions. And so as much as we want to figure out how to target tax credits to the lowest income Coloradans, we have limited money to do so, and other competing interests and people, lots of important needs to break up that pie. So it's just to say that's further compounded by this scarcity mindset that we're forced to grapple with in the state.
Kinsey, I'm going to have to let you have the last word because our time is almost up. I know there are 2 questions that we didn't get to, and I apologize, but we have those questions and we can try to respond separately. Kinsey, any final thoughts from you on any of the topics we've talked about or we're touching on at the end there?
Well, thank you. Yeah, I think just on the tax credit piece, really appreciate the representative and Graham kind of differentiating between the larger systemic ones and those that are trying to serve households. I think a good example of the struggle is a bill that was introduced, Senate Bill 146, being led by Senator Kolker, and it is intended to provide a income tax credit for income qualified renters. There is concern among many advocates, particularly for folks living on the lowest incomes, that people living on very low incomes often don't file taxes, and so would not be eligible or benefit from something like that. And credit to our colleague, Jack Regenbogen at the Colorado Poverty Law Project, who had looked up some information that I'm reading now. But according to the National Low Income Housing Coalition, there are about 164,000 households, renter households in Colorado, who earn less than 30% of their area's median income and are most likely not filing taxes. And so I think as we think about the benefits of tax credits and who's benefiting and how to make that most equitable, Jack and others have suggested something along the lines of like a renter's rebate program or something that's not necessarily tied to the filing of taxes in order to ensure that especially those renter households who are living on lease and struggling the most could benefit from where we determine to direct public funds. So I appreciate the question, Kathy, and it is certainly a tough nut to crack, but just another consideration.
Yeah, well, this has been awesome. I really appreciate everyone taking the time to learn more about these issues. It turns out that an hour is not sufficient to talk about housing policy, and there are a lot of interesting paths we could have gone down. I want to thank our team at the Bell Policy Center for doing an excellent job staffing this, putting this together. Josh has been posting some excellent resources, both on the Bell Policy Center's website, as well as Enterprise Community and on the General Assembly webpage. And Julie Pico and Hannah, thank you so much for organizing all of this. I'll just wrap up and say a big thank you to our panelists. You guys are experts, and we really appreciate your in-depth knowledge. Lastly, we have another webinar coming up in March. March 13th. Please join us for that webinar where we will continue to look at local policy solutions. And that's what I got for you. So get a little of this awesome weather if you can, and please spread the word and come back to us on March 13th for the next one of this continuing series. Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks all.
Thank you. Great job, everybody.